Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. The gun did not just go off. It roared, tearing through the silence of the gala like a jagged claw. Julian didn't even have time to scream. One moment he was holding a flute of champagne, calculating the stock market implications of his marriage, and the next, the world tilted violently on its axis. A massive, warm hand slammed into the small of his back, crushing the air from his lungs as he was thrown behind a wall of solid muscle and expensive Italian wool. Glass shattered, raining down like diamond dust, and the smell of ozone and burning gunpowder flooded his senses. But above the metallic tang of blood, a different scent choked him. Deep, terrifying, and intoxicating. It was the scent of a predator that had just found its prey. "Stay down," a voice growled, vibrating through Julian's chest. It wasn't a suggestion. Julian looked up, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Cashin Blackwood, the man he had married exactly 6 hours ago for a merger worth $3 billion, was standing over him. But the polite, cold CEO who had signed the papers was gone. In his place was something feral. Cashin's eyes, usually the color of polished steel, were blown wide, rimmed with a terrifying crimson. He held a would-be assassin by the throat, lifting the struggling man off the floor with one hand, as if he weighed nothing more than a rag doll. "I told them," Cashin whispered, his voice a low rumble that made the hair on Julian's arms stand up. "I told them that if they touched what belongs to me, I would burn the world down." Julian realized then, with a sinking dread in his stomach, that he hadn't married a businessman. He had married a monster. The arrangement was supposed to be sterile, clinical. A transaction between the Vane family, whose shipping empire was crumbling under debt, and Blackwood Corp., the apex predator of the technology sector. Julian Vane, an omega of rare lineage and sharper intellect, was the collateral. He had agreed to it with the detached cynicism that had kept him alive in a family that viewed him as a breeding mare rather than a son. "He is an alpha prime," Julian's father had warned him, nursing a whiskey in the dim light of his study. "Cashin Blackwood is not a man you play games with, Julian. You sign the papers, you warm his bed if he requires it, and you keep your mouth shut. Do not try to outsmart him." Julian had scoffed, adjusting his glasses. "He wants the European trade routes, father. He doesn't want me. I'm just the key to the lock. I'll run his household, he'll run his empire, and we'll ignore each other until the contract expires." He had been so arrogant, so foolishly confident in his ability to compartmentalize. The penthouse was a fortress of glass and steel overlooking the sprawling, rain-slicked city. It was cold, minimalist, and devoid of warmth, much like Julian assumed his marriage would be. For the first 2 weeks, it was. Cashin was a phantom. He left before Julian woke and returned long after Julian had retired to the guest wing. They communicated through assistants and legal briefs. It was perfect. It was safe. Until the night Julian decided to investigate the Blackwood accounts. Julian sat in the private study, the blue light of the monitor reflecting in his eyes. He was a financial genius. It was the one thing his secondary gender hadn't stripped from him. He noticed the irregularities immediately. Massive sums of money were being moved into accounts that didn't exist on the official ledger. Not laundering, protection, security, mercenaries. "What are you building, Cashin?" Julian murmured, tapping a key to decrypt a file. "A cage." Julian spun around, the chair screeching against the hardwood. Cashin was leaning against the doorframe. He had loosened his tie, the top button of his shirt undone to reveal the column of his throat. He looked exhausted, but his eyes were sharp, pinned on Julian with an intensity that felt like a physical weight. I was reviewing the quarterly projections," Julian lied, his voice steady despite the spike in his pulse. Cashin walked into the room. He didn't stomp, he prowled. Every movement was fluid, silent, and predatory. He stopped at the desk, placing his hands on the mahogany surface, trapping Julian between his arms without touching him. The scent of sandalwood, rain, and raw, suppressed dominance rolled off him in waves. "You were hacking my private server," Cashin corrected, his voice dangerously soft. "You're smart, Julian. Smarter than your father gave you credit for. But you're terrible at lying to me." Julian lifted his chin. He refused to cower. "If I am to be your partner, I need to know if you are funding illegal wars or drug cartels. I won't be dragged down with you. Cashin laughed. It was a dark, dry sound. Partner, is that what you think this is? It is a business arrangement. For you? Perhaps, Cashin murmured. He reached out, his fingers brushing the hair away from Julian's forehead. The touch was electric, shocking Julian into stillness. For your father, it was a bailout. But do you know why I agreed to the merger, Julian? Do you know why I absorbed $1 billion of your family's toxic debt? Julian swallowed hard. Because you need the shipping lanes. I could have bought the shipping lanes for pennies after your father went bankrupt, Cashin said, leaning closer. His lips were inches from Julian's ear. I didn't want the ships. I wanted the captain. Julian froze. I don't understand. I have been watching you for 3 years, Cashin confessed, the admission heavy in the air. I watched you single-handedly save your father's company from 3 hostile takeovers. I watched you endure the humiliation of the high society matchmaking galas with a spine of steel. I didn't marry you for business, Julian. I married you because you are the only thing in this city worth possessing. Julian pushed back, the chair rolling away. This is obsession. It's irrational. I am an alpha, Cashin said simply, straightening up. The mask of civility was slipping. Rationality is a luxury I discarded the moment I saw you. Now, close the laptop. Come to bed. I sleep in the guest wing. Not anymore. The dynamic shifted. The distance was gone, replaced by a suffocating proximity. Cashin was everywhere. He began coming home early. He insisted on eating dinner together. He fired Julian's personal security team and replaced them with his own elite guards. Men who looked at Julian not as an employer, but as a precious cargo they were terrified to scratch. Julian felt the walls closing in. He was a creature of logic, and Cashin was a force of nature that defied logic. The breaking point came a month later, at the Solstice Gala. It was the event of the season, a gathering of the city's elite. Julian wore a suit of midnight blue velvet, tailored to accentuate the slender lines of his waist. He felt exposed. Every alpha in the room turned to look at him as he entered on Cashin's arm. Usually, Julian would navigate the sharks with a polite smile. But tonight, the air was thick with tension. He could feel the eyes of his father, Lord Vane, drilling into him from across the ballroom. Cashin leaned down, his hand resting possessively on the small of Julian's back. Do not leave my side. I'm not a child, Cashin, Julian hissed under his breath. No, Cashin agreed, his eyes scanning the room for threats. You are a target. Julian pulled away, grabbing a glass of champagne. I need air. Stop hovering. He made it to the balcony, taking a deep breath of the cool night air. The city lights twinkled below, indifferent to his turmoil. He felt trapped. Trapped by his father's greed, trapped by his own biology, and now trapped by an alpha whose obsession felt like a golden chain. You look unhappy, boy. Julian turned. His father stood there, smoking a cigar, his face twisted in a sneer. Father, Julian nodded stiffly. I hear you've been digging into Blackwood's accounts, Lord Vane said, stepping closer. That wasn't part of the deal. I do what I must to ensure my own security. You are jeopardizing the payout. Lord Vane snapped, grabbing Julian's arm. His grip was bruising. You will be a good little Omega, you will spread your legs, and you will keep him happy. If he dissolves the merger because you're playing detective, I will ruin you. I have files, Julian. Photos from your university days. Things that would shame. Take your hand off him. The voice didn't come from the balcony door. It seemed to come from the shadows themselves. Cashin stepped into the light. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle. He didn't look like a CEO. He looked like an executioner. Lord Vane laughed nervously, though he released Julian's arm. Cashin, we were just having a family chat. The boy needs discipline. Discipline. Cashin repeated the word as if tasting it. In a blur of motion, Cashin crossed the distance. He didn't strike Lord Vane. He simply grabbed the older man by the lapels and slammed him against the stone railing of the balcony. The stone cracked. Cashin, Julian shouted, stepping forward. Don't. He's not worth it. Cashin didn't look at Julian. His eyes were fixed on Lord Vane, burning with a cold, terrifying rage. You touched him. You threatened him. I'm his father. Vane sputtered, his feet dangling off the ground. You were his father, Cashin corrected. Now, You are a breathing liability. I absorbed your debt not to save you, Vane, but to buy him. He is mine. His debts are mine. His enemies are mine. And if you ever look at him with anything other than absolute reverence, I will dismantle your company brick by brick and leave you to rot in the gutter." He dropped Vane. The older man crumpled to the floor, gasping for air. Cashin turned to Julian. The rage in his eyes vanished instantly, replaced by a desperate, searching concern. He reached out, his large hands hovering over Julian's arms. "Did he hurt you?" Julian stared at his husband. He saw the tremor in Cashin's hands. It wasn't from exertion, it was from fear. The mighty Cashin Blackwood, who could crush corporations with a signature, was shaking because he thought Julian had been hurt. "Why?" Julian whispered. "Why go this far?" "Because you are the oxygen in my lungs," Cashin said, his voice raw. "I don't know how to exist without you anymore." The drive home was silent. The rain lashed against the windows of the armored limousine. When they reached the penthouse, Julian didn't go to the guest wing. He followed Cashin into the master bedroom. Cashin stopped by the bed, turning to face him. "Julian, you don't have to." "Shut up," Julian said, his voice trembling slightly. He walked up to the alpha. The power dynamic that had defined their relationship, predator and prey, buyer and sold, felt different now. Julian reached out and placed his hand on Cashin's chest, over his heart. It was beating wildly. "You knew my father was embezzling from the merger funds," Julian stated. "It wasn't a question. That's why you built the cage. The security. The mercenaries. You weren't protecting your money. You were protecting me from him." Cashin looked away, a rare sign of vulnerability. "He would have killed you to keep the money flowing. I couldn't take the risk. I knew you would hate me for the restrictions, for the guards. I didn't care. As long as you were breathing, I could live with your hatred." Julian felt a crack in the ice that had encased his heart for years. He had spent his life believing that love was a weakness, a lever to be used against him. He had never considered that it could be a shield. "You are an arrogant, controlling, obsessive brute," Julian said softly. Cashin flinched. "I know. But," Julian continued, stepping closer, closing the gap until their bodies brushed. "You are the only person who has ever stood between me and the world." Julian reached up and undid the top button of Cashin's shirt. Cashin froze. His pupils blew wide, his breathing hitching. "Julian, be sure. If you start this, I will never let you go. There will be no separate rooms. No contracts. You will be mine, in every way an Omega can belong to an Alpha." "I'm tired of sleeping alone," Julian whispered, tilting his head back, exposing the pale, inviting curve of his neck. "Claim me, Cashin." The restraint snapped. Cashin growled, a low, guttural sound that vibrated through the room. He swept Julian up into his arms, his mouth capturing Julian's in a kiss that was less about romance and more about starvation. It was demanding, hot, and overwhelming. Julian melted into it, his fingers tangling in Cashin's hair, finally surrendering control. He realized now that the cage wasn't a prison. It was a sanctuary. And for the first time in his life, the wolf wasn't at the door to devour him. The wolf was at the door to keep everything else out. And that is how the viper tamed the wolf. If you enjoyed seeing Julian finally take control of his obsessive alpha, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you forgive a husband who stalked you for 3 years if it meant he saved your life? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then, prompt image. Prompt. Masterpiece. Best quality. High res. 1.2. Korean manhwa style. Semi-realistic. Digital art. 2 men. BL. Yaoi. Man 1. Tall alpha. Broad shoulders. Black hair with undercut. Sharp jawline. Intense crimson eyes. Wearing unbuttoned white dress shirt. Rolled sleeves. Possessive expression. Protective stance. Man 2. Slender omega. Silver-rimmed glasses. Messy blonde hair. Blue velvet suit jacket hanging off shoulders. Looking up with flushed face and mixed expression of shock and desire. Background is a dark luxury penthouse balcony at night with rain against glass, city lights bouquet, tense romantic atmosphere, cinematic lighting, dramatic shadows, intricate details.